Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where in this wild, wacky, and sometimes wonderful world you might be. Thank you so much for making Pride365 Certified part of your day. It is time for another big interview, and my goodness, do we have a big guest on this one. Trailblazing game changer, a barrier and ceiling breaker, a fearless leader, and an inspiration to so many people in the community. National Vice Chair at the National Civil Service Network for Gender Identity and Intersex, Advisory Board Member at My G Work, Patron for Gender Identity at Pink Triangle Theatre, Talk Show Panelist at Gadio, Diversity Role Model. I could go on and on and on. Also a Pride365 Champion. Welcome to the show, legend, Jacqueline Gavin.
You did me proud. Thank you very much for that, Sophie.
How are you doing this fine day, this summer? Has your summer off? Is your summer off to a good start?
It's got very, very hot all of a sudden over here in the lovely sunnier climes of the UK. And yeah, all good so far. Really, really positive, and long may it continue.
Long may it continue. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to go back a little bit before we start talking about what's happening in our universe today, because you have an absolutely fascinating story. And your beginnings came at a time where it was almost damn near impossible to navigate through. I can't even imagine having the kinds of conversations that you wanted to have, you know, back in whether it was the 70s or the early 80s. Can you just take our listeners back a little bit, Jacqui, and share your beginnings in terms of where you became your authentic self?
Long time ago. So for me, I became aware of difference probably not long after my 9th birthday. It was back in the days of black and white in 1976, where, as you said, being different meant you were more likely to be ostracized by your friends, your family, and of course that of the wider society. And I suppose the way I came to terms with it, or came to know that I was different, was I was one time sat at the dining room table and I was flicking between the pictures of a magazine. I didn't know it at the time, but I am dyslexic, and where words would be dancing all over the page, pictures would speak 1,000 words to me. And I came across one particular image of a man, and this image was also in black and white. Even though it was an image of a man, the thing that struck me most about the photograph was, first of all, he was sat in the Christy Keeler pose. Those of you that don't need the Christy Keeler pose, where the back of the chair is up against the individual and the individual isn't wearing any clothes. Again, not the reason it stuck out to me, but
it's a great shot.
But he wasn't happy, and that's the thing that struck me about it. And as I then flick over to reveal the next image, it's of the same man in the same pose, but this time he's ripping his skin off. And what he's feeling is under his male exterior is that of a beautiful female. The long flowing locks, the perfect makeup, the perfect skin, everything of femininity around this aspect. And of course, I'm screaming around the house, shouting at the top of my voice, trying to find a flap to allow me to let the girl inside of me. So that was the beginning of it. And of course, when you go through that kind of thing, your parents, first things your parents want to do is take you to the doctors. And of course, the doctors at that time were like, well, get him to do more boy type things. That will allow him to become more of a boy by doing things that boys always do: climb trees, go running, play football, of which I played football very, very well, going on to represent my school, my school's region, and of course my school's country being the best country in the world, which we talked at the top of the Scotland as well.
Yeah, so, you guys definitely tend to breed a good manager every now and again, don't you?
Indeed we do. Some guy, yes, well, we won't talk about that because we've already gone through that path as well.
Well, I can't imagine at 9 years old, because when you said that, I was thinking about the kind of first time I realized I was gay, and you know, I'm kissing this exceptionally handsome boy in Positano, in one of the most romantic places in the world, and everything just felt wrong and everything just felt off, and I ran, literally sprinted back to the hotel and hid under the sheets crying, just so afraid. So that fear that you felt at that age, how do you then have those conversations, and how do you, because a lot of the argument of today, isn't it, is about young kids, you know, kind of identifying with who they really are. But there's this juxtaposition, isn't there? It's all being politicized in some ways. How would the young Jacqui today navigate through this in comparison to kind of how it was for you back then?
You know what? I think I wouldn't change much about it. I mean, yes, it was difficult, but it was done in a way that I suppose was to test me, to make sure that this is really who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose if there was anything I would change, it would be to have them listen more, because back then it was like, as I said, push down the path of do things which we traditionally associate with being male. And for me, it's about, look, we've got to do the right thing. We've got to listen. And I think all too often, I think the world these days, we make an assumption that just because somebody says something, that we have to do something about it. Be directed by the child. The child themselves knows who they are. They know what they're feeling, etc., etc. And don't try and come at this and say, right, okay, let's put the words in the mouth of the child. The child will tell you how they're feeling and what is right for them.
Yeah. What's your take on what's happening, Jacqui, right now? I know that you do a ton of interviews. You're on a ton of panels. You travel. You talk to people from different cultures, backgrounds. You have been in this space for most of your life.
Yeah.
What do you feel about what's happening now? Because what we're trying to do as well here at Pride365 is bridge the gap, right? We're inclusive, not divisive. We're proactive, not political. You know, we're really, truly trying to elevate the lives of the community in the workplace and, of course, in the wider society. Someone like you who has seen it all, what's your take on what's happening today in the space where, when Pride Month, you're seeing people desecrate the flag and the flag losing so much respect? I've been waiting so long to hear your words and what you think.
The world is polarized right now, down to these little things. And it's a world of extremes. And that saddens me, that we're not prepared to find a way to listen to each other. And I think this is the great thing about Pride365, is it provides that platform of taking the views from that side and taking the views from that side and trying to, as you say, bridge that gap so that we better understand. And it's exactly the same place where I'm at, is I'm not going to scream blue murder based on what's happening from my own personal perspective as a trans person, without first listening to the people over here. But also there's this huge amount of people who are like, I don't want to choose to be in that side, and I don't want to choose to be in that side. I just want to understand what it means to be somebody who's in that space, without being judgmental, without being seen to be prejudiced in any way, shape, or form. Because if we don't allow people to ask questions and to better understand, then we're never going to move the dial. And that's a really, really crucial thing that is missing at the moment. As I say, because of the polarization of the world that we're in, as you say, LGBT flags or progressive flags being ripped down and torn into pieces, or the opposite extreme of that, people claiming that you're not real, you're not this, you're not this, you're not this. Who are we to make that judgment on either side, unless we're prepared to, first of all, debate and truly, truly understand it?
Do you think people can't debate or don't want to have the conversation because of fear? Is it people's, I mean, I don't want to talk about religion, and of course there's a lot of catalysts to the negativity and where that comes from and where that all stems from. But do you think fear is still at the nucleus of this conversation?
Yes and no. I mean, I think there's fear because people don't want to make mistakes. I think there's fear because people are all too quick to describe somebody as something or another without fully understanding it. And let's be honest, hate is a sense of fear. We react because we're feeling threatened. And that's one of the biggest things that we need to make sure that we're considerate of. I think we've also got to recognize that it's almost like there's an empowerment to it in some way. I call some people, rather than calling them influencers, I call them influenzas. The way they try and influence the world, I mean, unless they do it the right way, it can be like a disease. Let's not kid ourselves. It can be like a cold. And we've got to influence from within. We've got to influence and make those changes. I mean, call me very typical civil servantish or not, but the way I always used to deal with things, wherever there was a discussion needed to be had, I would ask people to go and grab one of these, go and grab some custard creams or whichever favorite biscuit yours is, and just simply talk. Engage in the conversation about what does it mean from your perspective? What does it mean from my perspective? What does it mean from the third person's perspective? And realize where the commonalities are to allow us to bridge the gap again, as we've spoken about.
Do you think your pragmatism there comes from, just to swing back and give the listeners a little bit maybe more of an insight, do you think that comes from your armed forces background? Is that why maybe you see things from both sides now? Do you think that's helped in some ways, having that?
I wouldn't necessarily say from the armed forces. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed my time in the armed forces. Yes, in some ways it was challenging because it was a time where being LGBT was difficult and it was against the legislation. But I think my main way is certainly my time as a civil servant. I will always look back on my time in the civil service with huge amount of fondness, huge amount of respect, whichever administration was sitting in that little behind that black door. It didn't matter whether it was red, whether it was blue with a touch of yellow. The fact is that we were able to influence from within by having those honest bits of dialogue, honest conversations. I can't speak for where we are right now, but certainly at a time where ministers were prepared to engage in conversation and listen, that was a real crucial thing.
What do you feel about those conversations that are happening in the UK and the US? How close are you to the situation that's going on in the US right now? I'm based in Southern California. The noise is beyond amplified across the United States. Are you seeing similar behaviors and similar outrage and support from both, sides in the UK? Can you talk me through that a little bit in terms of when you're in the trenches every single day? What are you seeing?
There's no denying that what we're seeing in the UK is very, very similar to the US. Okay, I think the US is different because each state it goes by a state-by-state basis, whereas obviously here in the UK it's based on, one could argue, UK legislation, but of course we're seeing the divide between the UK Parliament, Scottish Parliament, and other parliaments where there is different views on that as well. So I think they always say when the US gets a cold, the UK gets the flu. And of course, the world outside that window right now, although the sun may be beating down, it's a little bit of a scary one, regardless of where we are, because we are seeing the rise of the right. Or the extremes of the right is where I would go more. And I think it was Clint Eastwood says the problem with extremists is if they were to pivot 180 degrees, they would just realize how close they were to each other. And I think what we've got to try and do is find a way to encourage those people to about face, to use a military term, just to look each other in the eye and understand what's going on from each other's perspective.
That's one of the things our CEO Jack says often is when we sit down at a table with people and we really do start having those conversations, people realize that we have a lot more in common than we do, you know, in terms of our differences. And it may sound like a cliche, Jacqui, but it is true. But kind of trying to fight in between, you feel like it's like going through the Everglades, right? You know, you're swimming along and then all of a sudden this mush comes along and you've got to battle your way through it. How do we get through this part? Having been a champion for so long and having taken the community up until a certain point that you can, and now here you are again facing a different, I wouldn't say enemy, but facing a different challenge. How do you get through that part?
We need to pause. Absolutely, we need to pause where we are right now, and we need to look over the battlefield and find out where are the pitfalls, where are the challenges, where can we influence each other, from whether it's from looking at the enemy, if you want to put it in that kind of terms, to understand what is it they're trying to achieve, what are they looking for.
What do you think they're trying to achieve?
I think what they're trying to do, particularly from a trans perspective, is classify everybody who's trans under one umbrella. And I think that's partly the trans community understanding, but we've got to understand there is clearly a difference between gender identity to gender expression, and better break it down so that people understand. At the moment, because the way somebody expresses themselves doesn't give them the same lived experience as what I am. So when we put it all under one umbrella, it becomes a little bit confused. And I think we've got to be able to have that conversation to be able to say, right, okay, if there is a non-binary individual, what does that mean? That's how we broke it down before. We broke it down to get people to understand, why does a man want to become a female? Why does a female want to become a male? We broke it down so that people understood that. We haven't yet broken it down in a way that people understand that you have a male who will express themselves in a female way, wishing to use female pronouns or plural pronouns. We need to understand, why is it that is the case? And there is the blogger, and I hate to swear, but if we look at Matt Walsh, he's got that program out, What is, and forgive my pure Scottishness when I say this.
Woman, what is a woman?
There you go.
Yeah.
And he's gone to the opposite extreme of that. And what we need to get him, I mean, he has asked the question for a reason, because people are confused. Well, I always thought a female was about having a vagina, breasts, etc., and a male was somebody who had a phallus, etc. But do people understand that? Now you're saying to me that a female can be somebody who still has a penis, but just based on the way they dress. And that's the challenge that many people are facing right now, that they don't see that. Because, again, speaking at this from a UK perspective, we have the protected characteristics of sex, which is male or female, gender reassignment, which is the process of, when it's somebody has undergone the process of going through the process of going from male to female or female to male. There is no sort of understanding in that legislation about the expression piece.
I know. What do you feel about because this is all encompassing in sports and athletics, which kind of fueled the fire in the conversation, perhaps, and took it to a totally different level, Jacqui. As someone who has transitioned, I'd love to know your take on, do you think there should be a separate category for the trans community? Is it fair to women who have trained their entire lives, have a certain body type, to maybe be in a position where, you know, their life's work may not be rewarded because of someone else's choice. Can you help us understand that a little bit? Because I think that's something that is very prevalent in the news and topical, and maybe an area where it's easier for people to understand because they know their sports, right?
Yeah.
There's been male categories, female categories. You could even go now with the Brit Awards, you know, not having male, female categories and everything being, you know, the way they've kind of laid it out. Do you agree with all of that? What's your take on that part? And do you think that has added that element of fear to the people who are rejecting the movement?
I absolutely think it has added to the fear, without a doubt. I think there are certain challenges that we need to be considerate of, because I know, yes, I went through my gender reassignment process, dare I say it, over 35 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have the same physicality of what I once had? Probably not, but I went through the full gender transition process. So should I have the same right to compete in a female sport? The fact is that a lot of my development was very much in the male space. So I would have, in some ways, an unfair advantage. I know I can still hit a golf ball down the fairway,
Mm-hmm.
and I still have that ability to be able to do that even after that period of time. So there are challenges to be had, no denying that whatsoever. Should there be a category for trans people? I think so. In some ways, yes, because why should we deny the opportunity for trans people to compete? They should be able to compete in some way, shape, or form. But again, what is trans at the moment? And again, we go back to the question, what is a woman? What is trans? Trans is such a huge umbrella, and there's umbrellas within umbrellas as well, and that kind of context as well. So would I have the same ability to compete in terms of somebody who hasn't gone through the physicality, has not had the opportunity to have had the hormones that I've taken for the best part of 40 years of my life? So we've got to make all sorts of considerations within that, is where I'm at, is saying that.
What's your take on what's happening in schools? I know that you do a lot of work in the community with young people. You know, the suicide rate for transgender people, I don't know, under the age of, I have it here somewhere, 26, I think it is 48%. That's a shocking statistic. So what's your take on what's happening? Like that 9-year-old, the 9-year-old now, and I touched on it just at the top of the show a little bit, but if we just move that conversation a little bit to what's happening in schools, the fear of parents, even now people, if kids are just waving the rainbow flag down the hallway and celebrating Pride Month, it's being used as a weapon, you know, to fight against whatever it is that's happening. What do you think is really happening in our schools? And are the media also to blame for a lot of what's going on right now?
So in terms of schools, I think schools, they've come on leaps and bounds. I think schools still have a lot to do to understand it, because schools will sometimes be influenced by parents. Let's not be kid ourselves. And there will be a huge amount of pressures put on by the parents themselves. I think, again, schools can play an active role in creating that better understanding about what it is, and getting people to understand themselves and allowing the kids themselves to say, look, this is who I am. I go back to that point I said previously. This is how I feel. This is what is going on inside me. Through talking through their experience, talking through their emotions, getting to the root cause. Because sometimes if we just say, oh, John wants to be Jane, let's allow John to be Jane all the time, and that's fine. But don't push her down that path just because we feel that's the right thing to do. Let Jane tell you if they feel that they want to carry on down that path as Jane, or you know what, I might want to go back to being John, because that's okay. That's who I feel that I need to be able to do. And again, picking on the point about the media, it's a difficult one to answer in some ways. There are some avenues that are difficult and challenging that will not listen again, whereas there are other sides who are like saying, debate with me, but we won't talk about parent peers, but debate with me, and people aren't prepared to enter a debate. They are just like, you don't get it, you don't understand what it means to be me. Well, if you're not prepared to enter that debate, if you're not prepared to enter that discussion, then sadly there are going to be those outlets of the media will be like, well, you know what, we tried, and look at the kind of response we got.
And there are definitely people, brands that want to have the discussion and want to learn. And we see that through our work with our certified partners, you know, like Hilton and Nissan and Gadio and all of these incredible organizations that are really trying to understand so they can support each of their employees. And it's almost like employees and behavior and taking care of employees these days is hyper personalized too, isn't it, Jacqui? Because there is so much, at least the world is open to diversity, even though the volume of hate seems very loud right now. There's definitely an openness out there, is there not, to having these conversations? People willing to come to the table?
Always a willingness. And I think most organizations out there absolutely get it. And they want to be a part of the story that they can. Yes, there is still a lot of work to be done with other organizations that may not have policies or procedures or whatever. But I would say the majority of them are in a minority these days. If you go to any big multinational, they will be prepared because they realize that it's the right thing to do culturally. It's the right thing to do culturally. It's the right thing to embed within the organization. I think there is a danger, however, that we've gone from where we had something called equal opportunities, where we created alleged opportunities for those people from diverse backgrounds. And I say that purposely alleged because it was very much hearsay. Then in 2010 in the UK, when we introduced the Equality Act, or even probably before that, when it was going through Parliament, the debate was going through Parliament, we almost frightened people by saying, if you do not do this, you will be fined, you will be sent to jail, you will be this. And that created that void where suddenly people were frightened to talk about it, were frightened to engage in the conversation. So again, I go back to my point about the third person. The third person, even from an employer perspective, needs to be heard, because these days it's no longer about the employer wearing the crown, it's the employee who wears the crown. Yeah. That's a huge thing we need to recognize.
That's a great point. It really is. It wasn't like that in the 80s and the 90s. That is for sure. I remember starting my career in the film industry, and, you know, being a woman was one thing, being a gay woman was another thing. And that industry was run by men in suits, full stop. I'd like to get a couple more bits out of you before we leave our conversation today. And I feel like this is part one of a few conversations that we're going to have together in the ensuing months here.
Yeah.
Talking in the workplace, you know, giving advice to our organizations, you talking to people, young, old, governments, Fortune 500 companies, startups. Cancel culture is a real thing and has been a real thing. We've seen the author of Harry Potter be ostracized for her views and opinions. I would love your take, being a staunch Scot. And of course, she is one of the most influential personalities, writers, talents of our time. Do you think it's fair or foul for people of her ilk to have the opinions that she does? I think you're a believer in everyone is entitled to their opinion. How do you think it plays? What do you think about all that?
Again, this is a very, very complicated one. And I mean, again, are we allowing JK to fully come to the fore? Are we listening to what JK is actually saying in terms of everything that she's about? I think we've jumped on the bandwagon because it's like almost like because she has expressed or said something that has been potentially taken out of context. For me personally, again, being the person I am, I would love to be able to sit down with JK and say, look, let's have a talk about it. Let's understand where you're coming from in terms of what is it you're actually saying. Where is the fear factor that you believe is existing in that space? And I think that is where I feel that you've got the extreme point of view from the trans community saying she's racist, she's prejudiced, she's transphobic, she's this. Is she? Is she really transphobic? That's my question back, is because I don't firmly believe that she's fully transphobic. I think she doesn't fully understand the complexity of that wider umbrella that we've spoken about before. So I think, as I say, if I had the opportunity to sit down and have that conversation with JK, I would do it. I know, going off topic slightly, I was engaged in a debate with another individual who has extreme views on sex, gender identity and gender expression when I was involved in a debate with Simon Fanshawe at Cambridge University the other week there. And we were about to have the debate and the trans community walked out. And I was like, guys, don't do that. Stay and let's have the debate. But
exactly.
Before we knew it, they were outside the auditorium, beating drums, waving flags. That doesn't help the situation at all. We've got to really, really have a compelling discussion, a compelling debate. Otherwise, we will never, ever move the dial. Never.
I appreciate you answering that one because I too, Jacqui, I'm learning, right? And sometimes when I'm interviewing, I'm not afraid, but I'm like, I hope I don't this up. You know, I hope I don't use the wrong pronoun. I hope I don't say the wrong thing. And I'm supposedly someone in the community, but I feel like I have so much to learn. Like I'm not even scratching the surface in terms of understanding the complexities, but also what the simplicity of all this could be. You know, it's not that difficult, is it? If we're just accepting of each other. So with all the work you're doing out there, why Pride365? You do so many great things for so many great organizations. Why Pride365?
I think Pride365 because you talk about Jack. Jack, when him and I sat down for the first conversation that we had, he was very honest. He's, like you just said, he wants to learn. I mean, that's the way he tries to push Pride365 is we want to learn, not necessarily from an LGBT perspective, but from a cis, straight, white, male, female, whatever perspective, to be able to influence that. And I think if you've got allies from outside of the community who are prepared to say, look, this is a process that we want to go on, those allies will sometimes see things that you don't see because you're so entrenched in the warfare right on the front line. Jack and Pride365 is an organization that looks at things from a helicopter view and sees the full circle that we're trying to achieve, hence the name 365, as I would put it, because it's looking at that wider circle that allows us to be able to go, you know what, we're looking at this right round from everything that empowers people to be themselves. And I've got nothing but huge respect for what Pride365 is about. It's probably the organization that's gone from where it was to right to the top of the table, because I get it, I understand it, and I want to support those allies to really, really be on the same side as us, because the more allies we've got in our space, the better the conversation, the better we get people to understand.
Love that. That's perfect. And that's a great way to end our part one of our conversation. And I want to know, what is there something I haven't asked that you really want people to know about before we part ways here? There's always something I'll go away and I'll be like, I wish I'd have asked that. So the way I do it is I always ask, like, what's your summary? How do you summarize? What do you want people to know that maybe I haven't asked about?
Great question. I mean, for me, I think it's about recognizing that there are more people out there than we give justification for. I mean, we talk about influencers and influencers, but there are more voices than just the same people again and again. And I think if there was a question, it would be about how do we make sure that it's not just about the same people again and again and again that are having those conversations? How can we make it so that we create an opportunity for anyone, whether they be young, old, middle-aged, whatever their diversity characteristics, that we empower those voices to be heard.
Beautifully put. And you can follow Jacqui here. I hope I have your handle right. I've had it up throughout the show. Just wonderful stuff. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you. Keep fighting the good fight out there. And until next time, we look forward to another conversation with you.
Thank you very much, Sophie.
Thank you.